I think there's a good chance that we will be here this weekend, and I think it's time to vote.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Jimmy Mathis Show, October 3rd, 2018. Still waiting for the FBI report. Looks like it will not be made public, will not be made available to the general public. That by itself isn't unusual. But as we just heard from that senator roving the halls, what is changing a little bit right now is when the actual vote will be called for the confirmation of Judge Brett Kavanaugh, which Mitch McConnell, Majority Leader in the Senate, has doubled down repeatedly now over the last 24 hours that vote would come by Friday. And even the slightest rumblings right now of this going into the weekend or worst case next week is bad for Judge Kavanaugh. It is bad for the Republican Party, and it is letting a little bit of the momentum, believe it or not, yes, the momentum that the Republicans have right now, allowing that momentum to slide away. I have been saying for weeks, Judge Kavanaugh, the vote needs to be called. Now, if Democrats and the three Republicans right now that are on the fence do not want to vote yay, that is their decision. But to let this thing start to creep into next week, now again, what we're hearing from Mitch McConnell is the vote will be called, last I've heard from the leader, is by Friday. Not over the weekend, not letting this thing drift into Monday, Tuesday, which then becomes another week, which then allows more unsubstantiated accusations against Brett Kavanaugh to come forward. And what we are seeing right now, as the FBI has run their investigation, keeping in mind, ladies and gentlemen, they have not interviewed Dr. Ford and they have not interviewed Brett Kavanaugh, which then really kind of begs the question, what exactly are they doing in the last couple days? Now, a letter to the committee, to the Senate Judiciary Committee from the ex-boyfriend of Dr. Ford, is now reading from CNS News. This letter was redacted. His name was redacted, but it states, in quote, he was in a relationship with Dr. Ford from approximately 1992 to 1998. They had met in 1989 or 1990. Quote, during the time that we were dating, Dr. Ford lived with Monica McLean, who I understood to be a lifelong best friend. He writes in this letter to the Senate Judiciary Committee, stating that during this time, it was my understanding that McLean was interviewing for jobs with the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. We're going to dive into this letter slightly because it is totally contradicting the under oath testimony from Dr. Ford that she basically knew absolutely nothing about polygraphs, that she had never been coached on how to use a polygraph. She had never coached anybody else on how to use a polygraph. She was surprised how long it took to perform the polygraph and wasn't even aware if she was being recorded during the polygraph. During her lie detector test, she was so aloof to what was going on around her, she didn't even know what a video camera looked like in the room. So obviously this letter right now from Dr. Ford's ex-boyfriend, it totally contradicts the testimony that she gave last week on Thursday, September 27th. Right now, what we are seeing is not contradictions in Brett Kavanaugh's testimony, but Dr. Ford's testimony. So if the goal, if the purpose of this entire FBI investigation was to get to the bottom of it, whatever it is, then you would think right now it would make sense for the FBI to very quickly interview Dr. Ford. Remember, during the testimony, sexual assault expert and prosecutor Rachel Mitchell had asked Ford, and I quote, "Have you ever had discussions with anyone besides your attorney on how to take a polygraph?" Dr. Ford answered, "Never." The question continued, Mitchell, and I don't just mean contemptuous, but I mean any sort of tips or anything like that. Ford, "No, I was scared of the test itself, but was comfortable that I could tell the information and the test would reveal whatever it was going to reveal. I did not expect it to be as long as it was going to be, so it was a little bit stressful." Mitchell, again, the prosecutor, "Had you ever given any tips or advice to somebody who was looking to take a polygraph test. Emphasis added. Ford, never. Mitchell, okay, did you pay for the polygraph yourself? I don't think so. Okay, do you know who did pay for the polygraph? Ford said, no, I don't think so. This does matter. The whole purpose of the polygraph, ladies and gentlemen, was to tell whether she was lying or not, which is why you voluntarily do that, ties back into your credibility. And the simple question that should be asked right now is, what are we even trying to get to the bottom of? Keep in mind, even by Ford's own testimony, she was not raped by Judge Kavanaugh. Her version of what did occur has not been substantiated by anybody. There's been no collaboration of her story. The witnesses that Ford refers to have either refuted her allegations or, again, have failed to collaborate them. And now, all of a sudden, the Democrats are getting off of what I believe the original purpose of this FBI investigation was, which was to find out, I guess, if Kavanaugh was credible, whether he perjured himself. And it looks like, ladies and gentlemen, that Ford did. This wasn't a do you remember where you were 36 years ago question. Her roommate, her best friend, who evidently was looking for a job at the FBI or the U.S. Attorney's Office, was role-playing with Dr. Ford on how to, if not beat a polygraph, I'm not making that accusation, but at least to be aware of what the methodology was and how the process worked. So when she is being asked on the 27th in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, have you ever been involved in any sort of coaching when it comes to taking a lie detector test? The truthful answer, if we're trying to get back to credibility in all of this, would be unequivocally yes, not an emphatic no. And now it's flipped around to whether Kavanaugh had thrown ice at somebody back in college during what almost escalated to a bar fight, and the media flipping everything around on remarks that Donald Trump made last night, where he's basically calling out the hypocrisy and the inconsistency in Dr. Ford's testimony. And that's what the media is focusing on right now. We're not even talking about whether Ford had perjured herself, or at the very least, if her testimony is inaccurate, if the FBI should be investigating her. By investigating, I mean interviewing her. The two main players here, Dr. Ford and Brett Kavanaugh, neither one are even being spoken to by the FBI while they're trying to ramrod this thing through so they can hopefully call the vote on Friday, which at the very latest they should. But now it's gone not even from is there credibility to the testimony of Brett Kavanaugh. It was the tone in which he delivered it. Which is why Senator Flake came out yesterday and said that we don't need this on the Supreme Court. We don't need this temperament. Temperament is a word that we've heard over and over and over again. Not even his temperament as a judge. Keeping in mind, this individual has served flawlessly for decades. His judicial discretion, his judicial temperament has never been called into question. The only time that he remotely started to lose his stuff a little bit was when his entire life was being ripped apart on a worldwide stage on accusations that he vehemently denies. After a ranking member of the U.S. Senate, one that will be judging him, for a lack of a better word, Dianne Feinstein, deliberately sat on information, sandbagged information, to broadside him during a confirmation hearing for the highest court in the land. That's when his temperament got a little bit out of control. And then it went from his temperament to his drinking patterns, from his drinking patterns to whether he threw ice back in high school or college, wherever the alleged bar fight happened. Even Mitch McConnell getting a chuckle out of that on the Senate floor yesterday. Now we're not even talking about Brett Kavanaugh. or Dr. Ford. It's the remarks that Donald Trump made on a campaign speech yesterday.
Shouldn't happen to him. What he's going through, 36 years ago, this happened. I had one beer, right? I had one beer. Well, do you think it was? Nope, it was one beer. Oh, good. How did you get home? I don't remember. How'd you get there? I don't remember. Where is the place? I don't remember. How many years ago was it? I don't know. I don't know. What neighborhood was it in? I don't know. Where's the house? I don't know. Upstairs, downstairs, where was it? I don't know. But I had one beer. That's the only thing I remember.
Yeah, well, look, the problem that the media has with this is Donald Trump kind of changing his game plan a little bit, came out leading into the FBI investigation against Dr. Ford and said, let the process play out. And even during the testimony that was given by both Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh last Thursday, the president, in a very unusual turn of events, for the most part, stayed out of it. Remember? On Wednesday, I believe, Wednesday, president coming out saying he did not want to comment on testimony that had not been given yet. And the president came out and said she needs to be heard. These are very serious accusations. President saying, I don't want to jump to conclusions. Let's hear her out before we, quote unquote, judge anybody. And then what turned out to be a circus last Thursday during this confirmation hearing, trying to get the thing out of committee into a full vote last week, the president says, go ahead, let the FBI run a limited in-scope investigation to try to satisfy any of the concerns of any of the discrepancies within the testimony. He was criticized for that because the investigation that the FBI would be running would be limited in scope. And a lot of those are saying, well, listen, I bet this is the way the president wishes Mueller would run his investigation into the White House. Well, yeah, that is the way Mueller should be running his investigation into whether the accusations against Donald Trump when it comes to Russian collusion back during 2016, whether there was any collusion between candidate Donald Trump at the time, his team, and the Russians. It was not supposed to be this indefinite, ongoing investigation to anybody that ever had any association with Trump, as short as it may have been, such as Paul Manafort, where all of a sudden we find out that he had some bad banking practices many years ago, nothing to do with the Trump campaign, nothing to do with Donald Trump. But all of a sudden, that was flipped around as to how unethical this administration is. Donald Trump coming out yesterday, and he was not mocking Professor Ford. I didn't take it as him mocking anybody. Now, he may be calling out the hypocrisy in the world that we live in right now, which is pretty comical when those on the left are constantly asking for equality among everybody, whether that's the races or the sexes, that everybody should be treated the same. Well, of course they're not. Donald Trump yesterday, boarding Marine One, said he feels bad for young men out there. You know what? He's right about that. He's right about that. Listen to some of the commentators today. He sounds like an old privileged white man. I'm sorry. I thought we were trying to dial in the rhetoric a little bit. And speaking of, shortly I'll be getting to the editorial board with the Baltimore Sun, today's paper. This is what it looks like when heated politics crosses the line. We'll get to that in 1 second, Kelly. They are not trying to wind down the rhetoric. I don't even think Donald Trump was having fun at her expense. He was not making fun of the way she conducted herself through the testimony. He did not impersonate her. What he did not even speculate on her testimony. What he did say was, there sure is an awful lot that she can't conveniently remember, which she couldn't. Trump didn't give the testimony. The only testimony that is being called into question right now is Brett Kavanaugh's. And I am sorry, but I think this piece that came out, or the fact that this letter from an ex-boyfriend, his name redacted, Daily Caller thinks they have the name, but nobody's disputing the letter itself, his name redacted, but saying that she did have coaching or giving a polygraph. Letter says, and this wasn't a boyfriend that lasted for a week or two. They lived together for years. Other reports have it that when they broke up, she continued to run up his credit cards against his will until he threatened to turn it over to the fraud division of whatever credit card company, that was credit card company that she had kept. Well, I'm sorry. I think that calls into the question of character and credibility. I would think bank fraud would if throwing a piece of ice in a bar fight back when you're in college. Actually, it wasn't even a bar fight. Didn't escalate that far. If that is going to supersede the credibility of an honorable justice that has been serving on the nation's second highest court and doing it honorably for a long, long time, then I think the fact that your testimony, even if it does not meet the level of perjury, at the very least, it should call into question the inconsistencies of it. Because the stakes are high right now. And of course, this has nothing to do with sexual assault, has nothing to do with women not getting a fair shake, it has nothing to do with this individual who may have been victimized, may have not. Everybody's already conceding that fact. From the president to Brett Kavanaugh. Saying, I'm not questioning that she was assaulted back. Well, we don't know. If we're going to just start randomly jumping to conclusions here when the stakes are this high, then it would seem with the 6 previous FBI investigations and this kangaroo one that's going on right now, reasonable minds would come back to where they were 3 weeks ago, which is Brett Kavanaugh is more than qualified to serve on the high court. Now let's start talking about character. First of all, Senator McConnell, call the vote by Friday. Do not let this tack into the weekend. That is a colossal, colossal mistake. Second of all, after Kavanaugh hopefully is confirmed, and if he's not, we'll talk briefly about what the ramifications of that will be coming up in the midterm elections here roughly 1 month ago. Now let's start talking about censuring Dianne Feinstein. Because really, regardless of what comes out of this confirmation process, one thing is for absolute sure, she is acting unethically, which is funny because she's on the ethics committee. And this isn't even partisan. Not even partisan. Ranking Democrat member of the Judiciary Committee, a key vote, obviously, on whether Kavanaugh will serve on the high court or not. She seriously interfered with the Senate's performance of its constitutional duty to review judicial nominations. You really can't dispute that. By sandbagging that letter and then leaking it eventually, at the end of the day, still against Professor Ford's wishes, or at least her wishes to testify. And I'm sorry, there is no part of how that letter that was given to Dianne Feinstein via someone over in the House of Representatives, and that person got it just from a concerned constituent. I'm not buying it. And Dianne Feinstein doesn't have a whole lot of credibility. She has almost as much credibility right now as Ford, who totally forgot the fact that she was helping to coach someone that was up for an FBI job or U.S. attorney's job that was her best friend and her roommate. Can't remember that. Someone who has a major fear of flying has logged more hours than me, and I'm a pilot. Somebody that was using that excuse, trying to hold off as long as possible when she would come and testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So let's go ahead right now, ladies and gentlemen, and have a conversation about what happens to Dianne Feinstein. When is the Senate going to start policing their own? Start putting some ethics and credibility back into the upper chamber? Because it is the Dianne Feinsteins right now that are absolutely destroying that. But that's not the focus right now. It's Donald Trump bringing out some inconsistencies in her testimony, and then watching the White House with Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders trying to defend the president.
The president was stating the facts, and frankly, facts that were included in Special Prosecutor Rachel Mitchell's report. He was stating facts that were given during Dr. Ford's testimony, and the Senate has to make a decision based on those facts and whether or not they see Judge Kavanaugh to be qualified to hold the position on the Supreme Court. Every single word Judge Kavanaugh has said has been picked apart. Every single word, second by second, of his testimony has been picked apart. Yet if anybody says anything about the accusations that have been thrown against them, that's totally off limits and outrageous.
The president, ranking Republican members, the press secretary, there is nothing right now that I think Donald Trump needs to be apologizing for. Nothing at all. Not his remarks 2 days ago when he was boarding Marine One, where he said he is worried for young men out there. He should be, especially when you see the way Judge Kavanaugh has been treated. And absolutely, if nothing else, in the court of public opinion, men are absolutely presumed guilty, not innocent. And I am so sick and tired of listening to everybody going, well, this is not a court of law. No, you're right. The stakes are much higher than that. This has to do with who is going to be a swing vote will change the power structure of the U.S. Supreme Court. That's how high these stakes are. Someone that has dedicated their life to public service and done it honorably, having his life completely shattered and ripped apart. I'd like to say because he's a man. I'm not sure that Democrats would be doing this if Donald Trump had put a woman up, had nominated a woman for the Supreme Court. But you know what? I don't know. But now that we're done with all the theatrics of Feinstein and Cory Booker and the rest of them, now let's get down to business. You got what you wanted. It also shows how disingenuous Jeff Flake is in Arizona and why he probably couldn't win another election if he was running for one. But see, he's the hero in all this right now because he's able to act like a Democrat. He was able to lie to his constituents and the American people and frame it as though because of this interaction that he had with protesters on Capitol Hill that called him in the elevator, that's what got him to change his mind on the key vote last week and say, you know what? We need the FBI to look into this because we got to get to the bottom if the sexual assault ever happened. And he lied about that. He did not want time for the FBI to get to the bottom if there was a sexual assault 36 years ago, that the accuser cannot name the time, location, who was in the room, how she got an invitation to the party, doesn't remember when it was, all the stuff that Donald Trump brought out. That's not what Flake wanted. Flake just didn't want Kavanaugh in the high court. And then he made a mistake yesterday during his little forum with the Atlantic, and he told the truth for a change. He didn't say he was still concerned that they may be putting a sexual predator on the bench of the Supreme Court. He didn't say that. He was concerned with how partisan it has become. Explain to me what the hell that means, Senator. What, that Kavanaugh was defending himself? That he was aggressively denying very serious accusations in front of the U.S. Senate? That he wasn't going to be walked over? See, Flake can't take that because Flake, for once in his career, wanted to actually come out and be a Democrat, not just a Republican in name only, a rhino. And he came out during his forum to the Atlantic, and he wasn't talking about whether, again, Kavanaugh was a sexual predator or not. He was concerned with his decorum, that the court can't be partisan. Well, judges are partisan to some degree. And by the way, what does that mean anyway? So that's the whole thing. Republicans, everything's got to be nonpartisan. What does that mean? We have to adopt the liberal ideology? I'm tired of doing that. We did it with Bush for 8 years. Were the Democrats happy with that? It's the reason why we lost in 2012, because we put up Mitt Romney that allegedly was going to be a moderate, was going to be palatable to the Democrats. Let me tell you something. We put a real candidate up. Obama's not a two-term president. Put a real candidate up in 2008, and we don't put up good old John McCain, God rest his soul. Obama may never even been president. And since we're talking about judicial temperament, let's look after the Senate invoked a nuclear option that made it very easy for Obama to flood the lower courts with activist justices, which is what is happening right now, what has happened, as Obama completely just eviscerated the Constitution, where he stopped the country, stopped legislating from Capitol Hill, started legislating through various regulatory agencies, and decisions that were upheld because the Democrats cut out the minority power, and they were able to flood the lower courts. And now we're not even talking about whether Kavanaugh is a sexual predator or not. We're not even talking about his temperament anymore. That was yesterday's news. Now the question is the president, and the president's back to his old games because he's calling out the hypocrisy. And the left is upset because it's the same thing he's been doing for the last 4 years right now, 2 years in office and the 2 years prior that led him to office. And I'm reading this piece in the Baltimore Sun today from the editorial board. You may have heard this yesterday. Congressman Andy Harris from Maryland's 1st Congressional District. There was some scuffle near his office on Capitol Hill. The congressman got some bruises on his arm. Some scuffle had happened outside his office. He wasn't seriously hurt. Nobody was not defending it. Obviously, it's completely unacceptable. But there were some protesters out front of his office building and in front of the Capitol, and he was injured. Not bad, but he was injured. And the editorial board with the Baltimore Sun is trying to link what happened to Congressman Andy Harris to overall political rhetoric, which is absurd. The headline to the editorial from the editorial board: "This is what it looks like when heated politics crosses the line." Then there's a big picture of Congressman Andy Harris. Reading from the piece, "We're willing to take Anne Arundel County Councilman John Grazzo's word for it when he says he was not threatening actual harm to the reporters of the Annapolis Capitol when he warned one of them against running a quote-unquote hit piece against him, saying, quote, 'I'm telling you right now, as I promise you, you will regret it.' We're also willing to assume that whatever exactly happened Tuesday in the confrontation between protesters, marijuana protesters, and Representative Andy Harris at his Washington office, that they did not intend to physically harm him either. But both incidents serve as a reminder that the line today between heated political rhetoric and violence is far too thin. And we should all be careful to stay away or shy away from it." No, what you have is some snowflake protesters that don't like the congressman's stance on legalizing marijuana that assaulted him. That's an assault. Now, as far as the Councilman Grazzo's go, and obviously this is in reference to the horrible shooting at the Annapolis Capitol, there are terms in politics that you could put a violent slant on them, nothing to do with violence. How much money do you have in your campaign coffers? That's your war chest. I mean, there's a million of them. To sit here, what they're trying to do is to frame rhetoric as a call to action for violence. And basically, by the way, removing any sort of responsibility out of those that actually deliver this violence. So, yeah, okay, you have a councilman that had a beef with a reporter at a newspaper. Do you know how many politicians or candidates have issues with a wide range of reporters at all level of politics, all the way down from dog catcher up to obviously President of the United States of America? But to sit here and try to connect the dots between political rhetoric and actual violence, and of course what happened to Andy Harris, is completely unacceptable. Now, again, that doesn't even broach into the horrible shooting that happened in Annapolis months ago. But to sit here and try to compare the rhetoric of what a councilman says, I think that is what's dangerous. And the media, by the way, at the national level, does it all the time with Donald Trump. Donald Trump has a legitimate gripe with the media. A legitimate gripe. Perfect example, this piece in the New York Times yesterday that broke in today's paper, but was released yesterday. It was coming out on Donald Trump's father had basically bought millions of dollars worth of chips in one of his casinos. I'm drawing a blank on exactly which one. And I've read this story before, so I'm not going to sit here and go over this again. Basically, the casino needed income on its profit loss sheet to make good on a bond for the business. So it was a backdoor way to do that. They ended up having to pay a penalty on it. This is not new news. Piece was roughly 15,000 words in the New York Times that they had been working on for almost a year. That ironically enough came out today. 48 hours away from when the vote is supposed to be called for Judge Kavanaugh, when we're waiting to see what comes out from this FBI report, when it is becoming laughable what the Democrats are trying to make Kavanaugh look bad for, which is his drinking habits and whether he threw an ice cube 37 years ago. At the exact same time, we're learning that Judge Ford lied during her testimony. So that means that the narrative has to be changed. So we go back to what is tried and true, which is the rhetoric of Donald Trump. So focusing today on him calling out Professor Ford for her false, or at the very least, inaccurate testimony. And going back to, we need to see Donald Trump's taxes right now. And he's not worth as much as he says he is. And that's what they want to focus on. Ladies and gentlemen, it is going to be an interesting 48 hours coming up, waiting, maybe by the end of the day, waiting on the FBI report that will be coming out, and then we will see if Mitch McConnell will hold true to his word and call a vote by Friday. Worst case scenario, hopefully this does not expand past the weekend, but again, rumblings of that have been tossed out. You can catch the Jimmy Mathis Show Monday through Friday. Of course, your number one destination for it should be JimmyMathisShow.com. Follow me on Twitter at Jimmy Mathis Show, on Facebook, LinkedIn, all the normal social media platforms where you get podcasts, Apple iTunes, SoundCloud. We're back on SoundCloud. We had some issues with SoundCloud because of just storage limitations. We're back on that. Also, freetvbaltimore.com. Got the weekly television show. And you can also, of course, get links to that and updates on the TV show over at JimmyMathisShow.com. So everybody, have a wonderful day. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, Kelly. See you tomorrow. Bye.
I can get you buzzed, I can get you smiling, I can make you feel like you're sitting on an island. I can make it fruity, or I can make it strong. All you gotta do is tell me what you want. Put it to your lips, take a little sip, and tell me what you think. Yeah, I can fix a drink.